My name is Claire, and I'll never forget the night everything broke. It was supposed to be just another family dinner, the kind we'd had my entire life, polite on the surface, tense underneath. The roast chicken was on the table, the mashed potatoes in their usual bowl, and my father sat at the head of the table like a judge waiting for the trial to begin. Emily, my older sister, was already mid-story, talking about another achievement at work, another client she had landed. Mom laughed, hanging on every word, her eyes glowing with pride. Before I continue, please subscribe to show karma you're at the right side. Anyways, I tried to join in. I mentioned the project I had just finished, the one my boss had praised, the one that brought in a major account. But before I could even finish the sentence, my father cut across me to ask Emily another question. My words fell into silence, slipping through the cracks like they always did. I should have stayed quiet, but something in me rebelled that night. Years of being ignored, of being pushed aside, boiled over. "Does anyone even care what I do?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Or am I just here to fill a chair?" The room froze. Emily's fork hovered in midair, her smile faltering. My father narrowed his eyes. "Don't start, Claire," he muttered, as if my feelings were nothing more than a tantrum. "But Mom," she snapped. Her face twisted, and the warmth she reserved for Emily vanished into something ugly. "You know what?" she hissed, slamming her napkin onto the table. "If you don't like it here, then get the out, and don't you dare come back." Her voice was so loud it rattled the silverware. For a moment, I thought she didn't mean it, that someone, Dad, even Emily, would step in and tell her she'd gone too far. I looked around the table, waiting, but no one said a word. My father kept staring at his plate, his jaw tight. Emily shifted uncomfortably, but she didn't open her mouth. Not one of them defended me. The silence was louder than Mom's scream. I felt the weight of it pressing down on me, crushing me, telling me in no uncertain terms that I was alone at that table, alone in that family. Years of trying, years of hoping they'd finally see me for who I was, all of it collapsed in that single moment. They didn't want me. They never had. I sat there for a few seconds longer, my chest tight, my eyes burning, waiting for someone to call me back, to say it was a mistake. But the only sound was the scrape of Emily's knife on her plate, pretending to keep eating, pretending this wasn't happening. That was the moment it clicked. I wasn't just invisible anymore. I was disposable. And with those words still echoing in my ears, I realized I didn't have a family at all. From the outside, we were the kind of family people envied. Our house sat on a quiet suburban street, the kind with trimmed hedges and identical mailboxes. Every December, my mother mailed out glossy holiday cards. Me, Emily, Mom, and Dad posed perfectly in front of the fireplace. Emily's hair always curled just right, Dad in his pressed suit, Mom glowing with pride, and me tucked awkwardly to the side, my smile strained. Neighbors would stop us in the driveway to say how beautiful the photos were. "Such a picture-perfect family," they'd say. Summers were for barbecues in the backyard. The grill smoking, the picnic table lined with Mom's side dishes, laughter drifting into the evening air. On the surface, it looked like harmony. Guests would clap Dad on the back, call him a good man for providing so well. Mom was praised for her warmth, for raising such wonderful daughters. Emily always soaked up the spotlight, retelling her latest achievement, while I stayed quiet, sipping soda and hoping no one noticed the silence clinging to me. The illusion was powerful. Friends from school would visit and marvel at our big house with its polished wood floors and spotless kitchen. They'd whisper that I was lucky, that I had it all. But behind the walls, it wasn't luck. It was a performance. Everything was about appearances. And when the camera was put away, when the guests left and the dishes were stacked in the sink, the truth seeped back in. Inside those walls, love was rationed. Affection came in selective doses, always reserved for Emily. She was the child Mom and Dad held up as their crowning achievement. I was the shadow they tolerated. The comparisons were constant, relentless, whispered like background noise until they stuck in my head. "Look at Emily. Why can't you be more like her?" Emily makes it look easy. You should try harder. Even when I did well, it was never enough. A good grade meant nothing if Emily had gotten a better one first. An award only mattered if it could be matched against hers. Mom smiled at Emily with pride, but her eyes turned sharp when they landed on me. Dad bragged about Emily's accomplishments at every gathering, but when it came to me, his words were clipped, almost embarrassed. The house might have looked flawless, but the air inside was heavy with hierarchy. There were no bruises, no shouting matches, just a quiet cruelty that left deeper marks. The kind where silence at the dinner table said more than words ever could. Where Emily's stories drew applause, and mine drew yawns or interruptions. Where love was conditional, measured, and I always fell short. Everyone else saw the glossy photos, the neat lawn, the smiles at barbecues. But I lived inside the cracks of that illusion, where the paint peeled and the truth bled through. To the world, we were perfect. To me, we were a performance I was never invited to star in. Emily was the sun in our household, and I was expected to orbit quietly around her glow. From the moment she could walk, my parents treated her as if she had been born to shine. Her first words were recorded, replayed, and told to relatives for years. Her first dance recital was captured on camcorder, every twirl applauded like she was on a Broadway stage. And when I finally had my turn, standing nervous under the stage lights, Mom whispered to Dad, "Not as graceful as Emily." I heard it. I always heard it. By the time we reached school, Emily was the girl teachers adored. Straight A's came easily to her, and if they didn't, she made sure to charm her way into extra credit. Mom and Dad displayed her report cards on the fridge, circling her perfect grades in red marker as if they needed to glow brighter. When I brought home mine, A's with the occasional B, they nodded politely, then asked if I'd studied as hard as Emily did. "She just applies herself more," they'd say. At every dinner, Emily's achievements filled the air. Student council president, captain of the debate team, accepted into honors programs. Meanwhile, I sat with my hands in my lap, waiting for someone to ask about my art project, my volunteer work, or the small victories I had scraped together. They never did. If I spoke up, Dad would clear his throat and steer the conversation back to Emily, as though I had derailed the script. The idolization wasn't subtle. At family gatherings, relatives would swarm around Emily, asking about her future plans, nodding proudly at her rehearsed answers. I'd be standing a few feet away, holding a plate of food, invisible. One Thanksgiving, I mentioned I had won second place in a regional writing competition. Aunt Marie smiled vaguely, then immediately turned to Emily to gush about her latest award. I may as well have been wallpaper. Even in small moments, the favoritism was glaring. Emily wanted the bigger bedroom? Done. Emily wanted to borrow the car? Keys were handed over without question. I asked for a ride to a friend's house, and Mom sighed, complaining about gas. It wasn't just that Emily was celebrated, it was that I was dismissed. The message was constant, and it sank deep. Emily was the standard, and I would always fall short. If she got first place, my second was meaningless. If she earned praise, my efforts were reduced to afterthoughts. For years, I tried to keep up. I studied harder, volunteered, joined clubs. I thought maybe if I racked up enough accomplishments, they'd look at me the way they looked at her. But every time I thought I had caught their attention, Emily outshined me. And they forgot. She was their golden child, their pride, their joy. And I was the reminder that they only had room in their hearts for one star. Some wounds don't come from a single moment. They come from years of being chipped away, little by little, until there's barely anything left. My life at home was like that. 1,000 cuts, each one small enough to ignore. But together, they bled me dry. I remember my 12th birthday like it was yesterday. I had asked for a simple party, just a few friends, some balloons, a cake. The night before, I stayed up decorating the kitchen myself, taping streamers and setting out paper cups. When I woke the next morning, the decorations were gone. Mom had taken them down because Emily needed the kitchen to host her study group. "We'll celebrate another day," she promised. But that day never came. My birthday slipped by unnoticed, just like the years before and the years after. When I made the varsity soccer team in high school, I thought, finally, they'll be proud. I worked harder than anyone else to earn my spot. But when game day came, the stands were full of other parents waving signs and clapping. My side was empty. They had driven across town to watch Emily's choir performance instead. When I scored the winning goal, the roar of the crowd filled my ears. But the one sound I craved, my parents' cheers, never came. Graduation should have been my moment. I walked across that stage with honors cords draped around my shoulders. I searched the crowd for their faces, desperate to see them beaming. They clapped, sure. But afterward, the dinner conversation was all about Emily's internship offer, how promising her future looked, how lucky she was. My diploma sat on the table, barely touched, like it wasn't even mine. It wasn't just the big milestones, it was the everyday moments too. The way Mom would forget to pack me lunch but always remembered Emily's favorite snacks. The way Dad would ask Emily about her day at the dinner table and never bother to ask me. The way my artwork sat in a folder in my bedroom while Emily's trophies lined the mantel. Each memory blurred into the next until the years became a long pattern of erasure. I wasn't abused, not in the way people expect when they hear stories like mine. I was overlooked, ignored, treated like background noise in a house that only had room for one shining star. And somehow, that invisibility hurt more than shouting ever could. I used to tell myself they were just busy, that they didn't mean to forget, that if I tried harder, achieved more, maybe I'd finally earn their attention. But deep down, I knew the truth. My family didn't forget by accident. They forgot because remembering me wasn't important. Looking back, I can see the pattern so clearly: the forgotten birthdays, the empty bleachers, the muted applause at milestones that should have mattered. It all added up to one undeniable reality. In their eyes, I was never worth noticing, and that realization etched itself into me, shaping every choice I made, every hope I let die. The night of the dinner still replays in my head, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was the moment everything finally cracked. It wasn't just one argument, it was the weight of every slight, every forgotten birthday, every empty seat in the bleachers, all crashing down at once. For years, I told myself to let things go. I convinced myself my family didn't mean it, that I was being too sensitive, that if I just tried harder they would see me. But when Mom's scream tore through the air, "Get the F out and never come back," I realized it wasn't a mistake. It was the truth they had been showing me all along. The evening had started like any other family dinner. Emily was talking about her latest accomplishment, a new promotion her boss had hinted at, and Mom and Dad were hanging on every word. I sat there quietly, poking at my food, trying not to feel invisible. But I couldn't help myself. I mentioned the project I had just finished at work, one that had landed my company a big account. It was something I was proud of, something I thought might earn me even a sliver of recognition. Dad didn't even look at me. He just shifted the conversation back to Emily. Mom smiled politely, then went back to asking Emily about her plans for the weekend. That was when something inside me snapped. I couldn't swallow it anymore. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. Does it matter what I do? Or am I just wasting my breath? The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut skin. Dad frowned like I'd embarrassed him. Emily froze, wide-eyed. And Mom, her face hardened in a way I'll never forget. "You always have to make everything about you," she hissed. "You're selfish, Claire. You drag everyone down with your whining. If you hate it here so much, then get the out and don't come back." For a heartbeat, I waited. I waited for Dad to tell her she'd gone too far. I waited for Emily to say something, anything, to defend me. But no one moved, no one spoke. The air was heavy with their silence, and in that silence the truth became crystal clear. They weren't shocked by her words. They weren't horrified. They agreed. I looked at their faces, searching for even a flicker of regret, a hint that I mattered. But I found nothing. Just Dad staring at his plate, Emily twisting her napkin in her lap, Mom glaring at me like I was an intruder in her perfect life. It was like the curtain had finally dropped on the illusion I'd been clinging to. All those years of hoping, of fighting for scraps of attention, dissolved in an instant. They didn't want me. They never had. I wasn't part of the family. I was a burden, an afterthought they wished away. That night wasn't just an argument. It was a verdict. And for the first time in my life, I heard it clearly. They wanted me gone. I went upstairs without a word, the sound of my footsteps swallowed by the heavy silence that followed Mom's outburst. My heart was pounding, but my face felt oddly calm, like the decision had already been made for me. If they wanted me gone, then I would go. My room looked smaller than I remembered, though maybe that was just because I was finally seeing it clearly. The walls were lined with little pieces of me, sketches taped near the desk, books stacked haphazardly on the shelf, photos I had taken with friends over the years. None of it had ever mattered to them. This space, my supposed sanctuary, had always felt temporary, like a corner of the house I was allowed to occupy but never truly belong in. I pulled a suitcase from under the bed and began to pack. Clothes first, then the books I couldn't leave behind, then a few keepsakes that still meant something to me. Each fold of fabric, each item tucked away, felt like I was erasing myself from the house brick by brick. I half expected someone to knock on the door, to say they hadn't meant it, to tell me I should stay. But no one came. Downstairs, I could still hear the faint clatter of silverware. They had gone back to eating. My absence at the table was no different to them than my presence had been, easily overlooked, irrelevant. That realization made the ache in my chest sharp, but it also made my hands steadier. I stopped in front of the mirror, taking in my reflection one last time. My eyes looked tired but determined. I wasn't leaving in defeat, I told myself. I was leaving because they had already decided I didn't belong. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere outside these walls, there was a place I could. I zipped the suitcase shut and slung my backpack over my shoulder. As I carried everything down the stairs, no one even looked up. Mom refilled Emily's glass. Dad wiped his mouth with a napkin. Emily shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flickering toward me for just a second before darting away. That second was all the confirmation I needed. If they had cared, if I had mattered, they would have said something. At the door, I hesitated, my hand on the knob. I thought about every year I had spent trying to prove myself, every conversation where I had hoped for approval, every time I had prayed they would see me. All of it ended here, in silence. The night air rushed against my face as I stepped outside. It was cold, biting, and yet it felt like the first real breath I'd taken in years. The street was quiet, the houses around ours glowing with warm yellow lights, families gathered together inside. I was alone, dragging my suitcase across the pavement, but I wasn't afraid. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for them to notice me. For the first time, I was choosing myself. And though the road ahead was uncertain, it carried something I had never felt in that house: freedom. The first apartment I found was hardly more than a box. A single window that looked out over an alley, paint peeling from the walls, and a radiator that clanged like it was protesting its own existence. The rent ate almost everything I had saved, leaving me with just enough to scrape by each month if I stuck to instant noodles and cheap coffee. Some nights, I lay on the thin mattress on the floor and listened to the sounds of the city, the hum of traffic, the occasional siren, and wondered if I had made a mistake. The days blurred together at first. I worked long hours at a job that barely covered the bills. My mornings started before dawn, crammed into the subway with strangers, and ended late at night when I trudged up the cracked stairs to my apartment with aching feet. The exhaustion was constant, but it was different than before. This tiredness was mine. No one was waiting to belittle me when I walked through the door. No one was dismissing my efforts or telling me I wasn't enough. For the first time, the weight I carried was heavy, but it was my own. I filled the silence of that little apartment with small rituals: a secondhand kettle for tea, a blanket I found at a thrift store, a plant that I bought with my first paycheck just to see if I could keep something alive. It wasn't much, but every corner, every choice was mine. That freedom, fragile as it was, felt like oxygen. There were nights I cried quietly into the pillow, the ache of loneliness pressing in. I missed the idea of family, the safety I thought it was supposed to mean, not the version I had actually lived. But even in those moments of grief, I knew I couldn't go back. The silence of my apartment was still kinder than the silence of that dinner table. The city itself became my teacher. It demanded resilience. It forced me to budget every dollar, to push myself at work even when I wanted to collapse, to learn how to ask for help when things felt impossible. And slowly, I found my rhythm. The cashier at the corner store started recognizing me. The barista down the block learned my order. A neighbor held the door open one night and asked how I was settling in. Small gestures, but each one reminded me that connections could be built, not given, not inherited, but chosen. It was hard. I won't lie and say otherwise. But the struggle carried a strange kind of sweetness, because every meal I bought, every bill I paid, every long shift I survived was proof that I could make it on my own. And no matter how tiny that apartment was, no matter how thin the walls or how loud the radiator, it was mine. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living in anyone else's shadow. The life I was building was rough and uncertain, but it was finally, undeniably, mine. Time has a way of stretching and softening the sharp edges of survival. What once felt like endless nights of counting coins and holding my breath at the grocery checkout slowly gave way to something sturdier, something that looked suspiciously like a life. It started at work. I had kept my head down, determined to prove myself, and one day my manager pulled me aside. "You've been carrying this team," she said, sliding a stack of reports toward me. "How would you feel about leading your own project?" The promotion wasn't glamorous, but it was a step, a chance to have a voice, to be recognized for the effort I poured in. For the first time, I wasn't being compared to anyone. My work spoke for itself, and the recognition was mine alone. With a little more stability came the ability to breathe. I traded the mattress on the floor for a real bed. I bought a second lamp, painted the walls in warm colors, and for the first time, my apartment began to feel like home. Not the kind of staged perfection my parents sent out on holiday cards, but something real, something mine. Friends found me when I wasn't looking. A coworker invited me out for drinks after a long week, and suddenly Friday nights weren't just about collapsing into bed. I signed up for a weekend pottery class and discovered the joy of creating something with my hands, clay spinning beneath my fingers, shaping into bowls that weren't perfect but carried my fingerprints like signatures. Around me, faces became familiar. People who asked how I was and meant it. People who noticed if I didn't show up. Slowly, my circle grew. Not through obligation or shared blood, but through choice. Independence tasted better with every small victory. The first time I fixed a leaky faucet on my own, I laughed out loud in the silence of my apartment, water dripping down my wrist, triumphant. The first time I looked at my bank account and saw not scarcity but a little cushion, I felt taller, stronger. I learned to cook meals I actually enjoyed instead of settling for scraps. I filled my shelves with books I loved, not the ones I thought might impress someone else. There were moments I caught myself thinking, this is what it should feel like. Not perfection, not applause, just the steady rhythm of a life that fit me. For so long, I had bent myself into shapes to fit my family's expectations. Now, for the first time, I was standing upright. I still had my share of hard days, but even in the hardest ones, I knew I wasn't the same person who had walked out of that house with a suitcase and no plan. I was becoming someone different, someone who didn't just survive, but built something worth living in. And as my world slowly expanded, I realized I was no longer chasing the approval of people who had cast me aside. I was writing my own story, one choice at a time. Even as my life began to steady, the loneliness found ways to slip through the cracks. On the outside, I looked fine, better than fine. I had my work, my apartment, my small circle of friends. People saw me smiling and thought I was moving forward, and in so many ways, I was. But late at night, when the noise of the city faded and I was left with only my thoughts, the ache returned. It wasn't for my family as they were, but for what they were supposed to be. That ache always seemed sharpest when I opened my phone. One evening, after a long week, I made the mistake of scrolling through social media. There it was, Emily's newest post. A perfectly framed photo of the dining room table back home, plates neatly arranged, wine glasses catching the light. Mom and Dad sat on either side of her, smiling as if life had never known tension. Emily, radiant in the center, captioned it, "Another wonderful family dinner. Nothing matters more." I stared at the image longer than I should have. To anyone else it looked beautiful, warm, wholesome, enviable. To me, it was a punch in the stomach. That was the same table where my mother told me to get out. The same table where silence had crushed me, where no one had spoken up. And now, that table was posted as if it held only love, only laughter. My absence was invisible, erased, as if I had never belonged there at all. The comments flooded in, predictable and saccharine. "Such a perfect family. Emily, you're so lucky to have this." Goals. I scrolled through them with a numb thumb, each word driving the knife deeper. No one outside those walls would ever know what had really happened. They only saw the polished exterior, the illusion my family had mastered for years. I closed the app, but the images stayed with me. Mom's hand on Emily's shoulder, Dad leaning in proudly, the golden glow of a scene I'd been cut out of. It was a reminder that, no matter how much progress I made in my own life, I was still the missing piece of their puzzle, and they preferred it that way. The loneliness wasn't just about being excluded. It was about knowing they were fine without me. That their lives continued seamlessly, maybe even better, with me gone. And even though I had chosen not to go back, even though I knew I was healthier away from them, the sting of being erased burned. I lay in bed that night, phone face down on the table, wondering if the ache would ever stop. Progress didn't erase the craving for something I'd never had. A family that showed up, that cared without conditions, that wanted me at the table. I had carved out a life of my own, but in moments like this, I felt the hollow space where love was supposed to live. And no matter how strong I had become, that emptiness still found ways to whisper my name. It started as a passing comment, the kind you might almost overlook. I was at the grocery store when I bumped into an old neighbor from back home, someone who had known my family for years. After the polite small talk, she lowered her voice and said, "Your parents must be stressed, huh? I heard Frank's firm isn't doing so well." I froze, plastering on a neutral smile. She carried on, oblivious to the knot forming in my chest. "I suppose every family has their struggles, but they've always been so private about it." That night, I couldn't stop replaying her words. My father had built his whole identity on being the successful provider, the architect with the polished firm and the tailored suits. If that image was cracking, it meant the foundation of their carefully curated lives was beginning to crumble. A week later, a cousin reached out, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. She was venting about how Aunt Marie had asked the family to help cover the cost of Grandma's medical bills, and in her frustration, she slipped. "Honestly, your parents could help if they weren't drowning in debt. Everyone knows they've been living above their means for years." She paused, realizing what she'd revealed. "Oh, I thought you already knew." I didn't. But suddenly, the whispers made sense. The glossy family dinners Emily posted online, the perfect vacations, the show of stability, it was all smoke and mirrors. Behind the curtain, things weren't perfect. They weren't even close. Then came the news about Emily. A friend from high school sent me a message out of the blue. "Did you see? Emily's engagement photos are gone. Deleted. Something must have happened." I searched, and sure enough, the posts that once showcased her smiling with her fiancé had vanished without a trace. When I scrolled through her profile, the perfection was still there. Photos of brunches, of wine nights with friends. But if you looked closely, the cracks were showing. Her captions were vague, her smile tight. Piece by piece, the image I had grown up resenting began to shatter. The golden family that had cast me aside, that had lived so effortlessly without me, wasn't as unbreakable as they had always appeared. My parents weren't untouchable. Emily wasn't invincible. Their lives, once so carefully staged, were showing signs of collapse. I should have felt vindicated. I should have smiled, thinking karma had finally come home. And part of me did. But another part felt something heavier. It was strange, hearing that the fortress I could never enter was falling apart from the inside. For years I thought they were better off without me, that their lives were seamless and flawless. Now I realize they weren't flawless at all. They were fragile. The whispers reached me like echoes from a house I no longer lived in, a reminder that even the most polished walls can crack. And though I had been erased from their picture, I could see clearly now. Their illusion was crumbling without my help. The call came late on a Tuesday, months after I had last heard a word from anyone in that house. My phone lit up with Emily's name, and for a moment I considered letting it ring. The silence we'd shared for so long had almost become comforting, and I wasn't sure I wanted to disturb it, but curiosity won, and I pressed accept. Her voice was sharp, carrying the same confidence she'd always worn like armor. "Claire, what's going on with you? Why did you just disappear? Why did you cut us off?" It wasn't worry in her tone. It was accusation, like my absence was an inconvenience she couldn't explain to others. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, letting her words hang there. She had no idea. All those months I'd spent scraping together a new life, all the nights I had scrolled past her perfect family photos while sitting alone in my apartment, all the times I swallowed down the ache of being erased. She had lived untouched by it all. For her, my silence was sudden. For me, it was the natural end to years of being ignored. "I didn't just disappear, Emily," I finally said. My voice was calm, steadier than I felt. "You all pushed me out, you just never noticed." She scoffed, a sound halfway between disbelief and annoyance. "That's ridiculous. Mom and Dad have always been there for us. You're the one who pulled away." There it was. The familiar script, the narrative that kept her at the center while I was cast as the difficult one. I closed my eyes, fighting the anger rising in me. This wasn't the moment to explode, but it was the moment to stop hiding. "Do you even remember that night?" I asked quietly. "The night Mom told me to get the out and never come back? Do you remember how you sat there and said nothing?" There was silence on the other end. For once, Emily didn't have a quick retort. "I left because it was clear none of you wanted me there," I continued, the words flowing now. "Every forgotten birthday, every time my accomplishments were brushed aside, every empty seat where you should have been, those weren't accidents. That night just made it undeniable." Her breath caught, barely audible through the phone. "Claire, I didn't know you felt like that." My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. "Of course you didn't, because you never had to think about it. You were the one they praised, the one they held up as perfect. You didn't have to wonder if you mattered, you already did." Another pause, heavier this time. I imagined her sitting in her perfect apartment, the cracks in her world she tried so hard to hide widening just a little more. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked softly. "Because you finally asked," I said, "and I'm tired of pretending I don't know the answer." The line went quiet. For the first time in our lives, Emily had no defense, and for the first time in mine, I wasn't afraid to tell the truth. I took a deep breath because once I started, there would be no going back. The silence on the line told me Emily was waiting, maybe even bracing herself, and for the first time in my life, I had her undivided attention. "Do you want the truth, Emily?" I asked. My voice cracked a little, but I steadied it. "Because I've carried it for years, and you've never asked until now." She hesitated. "I'm listening." So I told her. I told her about the night that changed everything, the way Mom's voice sliced through the air, screaming at me to get out and never come back. How I had looked around that table, hoping, praying someone would defend me, and how the silence that followed told me more than her words ever could. "You didn't speak, Emily," I said. You just sat there, twisting your napkin, letting her banish me like I was nothing." Emily inhaled sharply on the other end, but she didn't interrupt. "And it wasn't just that night," I continued. "It was every year leading up to it. The birthdays they forgot, the soccer games they never came to, the graduation where my diploma might as well have been invisible because all they wanted to talk about was your internship. I was there, trying so hard, hoping if I just did one more thing right, they'd notice me. But they never did. They didn't see me at all." My chest was tight, but the words kept coming. "I sat alone in that house for years, Emily. While you were praised for every little thing, I was the shadow in the corner. And the worst part? I convinced myself it was my fault, that if I tried harder, if I just stopped needing so much, maybe they'd let me in. But that night, the night Mom screamed at me, I finally understood. They didn't want me. They never had." On the other end, Emily was quiet. Too quiet. For a moment I thought she'd hung up, but then I heard it, a shaky breath, the sound of someone fighting back tears. "I didn't know," she whispered finally. "I didn't see it." I closed my eyes, leaning back against the couch. "Of course you didn't. You were the one they adored. You didn't have to notice, because you had everything I was begging for. And maybe it wasn't your job to protect me, but God, Emily, even a word, even once, would have mattered." Her voice broke when she answered. I thought you were just distant. I thought you didn't want to be part of things." "That's the story they told you," I said softly. "And it was easier for you to believe it than to see me." There was a long pause, then quietly, "Claire, I believe you. I see it now." For the first time in years, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the weight of silence lifting. Emily wasn't defending them, she wasn't excusing it, she was finally seeing me. The silence between us stretched, heavy but alive with something new. Acknowledgement. Then Emily spoke, her voice trembling in a way I'd never heard before. "You're right, Claire. I was blind. I let them make me the center of everything, and I didn't question it. I didn't want to question it. It felt good being their favorite, but it meant pretending not to see what it did to you." She swallowed hard, and for the first time in my life, I heard not the polished confidence of the golden child, but raw regret. "I was complicit. I should have stood up for you, and I didn't." Tears blurred my vision, but I let them fall. I had waited my whole life for someone in that house to say those words, to admit the truth I had been carrying alone. "I don't need perfection from you, Emily," I whispered. "I just needed someone to see me." "I see you now," she said firmly. "And I'm not standing on their side anymore. Not after hearing this. Not after finally understanding what they did." It felt like the ground shifted beneath me, the old balance of power tipping in a way I never thought possible. For so long, Emily had been the one they paraded, the one who shined while I stood in shadow. And now, she was standing beside me, not above me, not in front of me, beside me. "They'll never admit it," I said bitterly. "They'll twist it, deny it, act like I'm exaggerating. They always do." "Then let them," Emily replied. "Let them face the cracks in the perfect image they're still trying to hold together. You and we don't have to carry that anymore." The words settled into me like sunlight breaking through a long storm. For the first time, I didn't feel alone in my truth. My sister, the one I had resented for years, was finally with me, and together we could leave our parents to wrestle with the illusions they had chosen over love. In the weeks that followed, the distance between us and them grew wider. Emily stopped playing the role of their golden child, and without her compliance, the family portrait they tried so hard to maintain began to collapse. Relatives started asking questions, whispers turned into conversations, and the truth, ugly and undeniable, started to surface. My parents were left to answer for themselves, and for once, I didn't care how they spun it. Their downfall wasn't my responsibility. It never had been. Meanwhile, my own circle grew brighter.